Hey guys, I'm going to show you how you should be training in the gym. And I particularly want to show you, why the typical way of training in the gym is a really big waste of time and how you can train way more efficiently with your time. I call it the gymcel way of training. Basically, the gym is a big part of their life. They are going to be preparing for the gym as soon as they wake up. They have their specific meals for the gym, their pre-workout meal. They need their pre-workout to get through their kind of hardcore workout. They'll take things like pump supplements to get a better pump. It's kind of like the gym is like the only part of their life. It's kind of that thing where the gym is your whole personality. You don't want that. They're gonna train 5 to 10 hours a week. The thing is, if the way muscle growth works, like you have to train for years. It's not like if you train for 20 hours one week that you're going to make all this extra progress. The main thing is just training for years. That's the main thing to see progress. So if you are spending a lot of time in your training, then over the years it's like a lot of your life that you're spending or wasting or whatever. So just because of the way muscle growth works, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to be spending a ton of time. Their progress might be slightly faster. It's not a lot faster. It's not worth it for like a little faster progress, and like not even noticeably faster. They can only continue to train by being more consumed by the gym. So what I mean by this is because their whole routine is basically very hardcore, it requires a lot of motivation to even go to the gym every time. They won't psychologically be able to do it unless they maintain their levels of motivation. So they'll basically have to, the gym will have to become like a huge part of their life, even if it wasn't their whole life in the beginning. Now, this way of training that I recommend, the nonchalant minimalist way of training, the gym is going to be very easy, meaning you don't need insane levels of motivation, when you have to go do your workout. You'll be training 1 to 3 hours a week. So, you're saving a ton of time, especially over the years. You're spending like 25% of the time. You'll grow about 80% as fast. There's not an exact number, and the more advanced you get, the smaller the difference becomes between training 5 to 10 hours a week and 1 to 3 hours a week, the more advanced you become. But, it's not really worth it for anyone to be spending 4 times as much time and getting 20% faster progress at best. You'll be able to train for years because you won't be relied on insane levels of motivation. You won't be reliant on insane levels of motivation, every time you have to go train. And psychologically, it's easy to adjust the routine if your life gets busy. So basically, what I mean by this is if you're in your head, you're thinking that you need to do a very hardcore workout, it's going to be, when you don't have time for that, you're going to be more likely to just not go at all. But if you recognize, how muscle growth works and that, you don't need a super long workout, even when you don't have time for your regular training, you can still go and spend like half the time. And it's not difficult for you psychologically to not do your full workout. Now let's talk about why people fall into the gym cell trap, as I call it. So the main reason is going to be this thing called friction. What this means is, so people who go to the gym will tend to train more or less, depending on their level of motivation. That's for people who are already going to the gym. But people who haven't started going to the gym yet, if they're not like super motivated, they won't start going because it's kind of an awkward situation because it's your first time going. So the only people who start going to the gym tend to be the people who have super high levels of motivation. The people who have just like medium levels of motivation to go, aren't going to go. So yeah, that's kind of why so many people who start going will be training like this. They won't start gradually. They won't start training, more minimalist. They're going to start very maximalist, just because of that selection bias of who starts going to the gym. The visibility bias is basically the people who you see on social media and stuff training. They're the ones who have a fitness page, so that's why you're seeing them. And those are also going to tend to be the people who are more hardcore about the gym and therefore want to train 8 hours a week or whatever. So you're kind of more exposed to that way of training, and you'll kind of think that that's the way everyone trains and the way you should train. This hardcore bias is basically, if you look at everyone who goes to the gym and look at the more hardcore people and you look at the less hardcore people, The more hardcore people are going to be significantly better off. You're going to have way more progress. And that's not because you need to train hardcore to make good progress. It's more the fact that other areas are going to be tend to be better with these kinds of people. They're going to have a stick to their diet better. They're going to also tend to be more consistent with the gym because if you're super motivated, you're going to probably not quit. They're also going to do things like actually train close to failure. If you're someone who goes to the gym and you don't care that much, you're probably not even like going near failure. But it doesn't mean you have to do a super long workout to just go to failure or go close to failure. So don't be fooled by the fact that this hardcore bias is a thing where even like if you look at bodybuilders, most bodybuilders tend to train like a gymcel as well. It doesn't mean that that's like by far going to give you way better results or anything. In fact, natural bodybuilders before steroids trained roughly how I'm going to recommend you train. They all did pretty low volume. They did probably 1 to 3 sets per muscle per workout. They were more on the lower end of that, 1 to 3. They all did high frequency full body workouts. Full body was super common. These are just like the most famous bodybuilders before steroids, but pretty much all of them trained like how I'm going to recommend you train. So it's not just like, you're going against all the people who have been successful in getting a good physique. It's not like you're going against that by training how I'm going to recommend. This is in fact how the bodybuilders who you should care about train, because the ones who were training before steroids were a thing. They didn't even go all the way to failure, even though they were only doing like 1 to 3 sets. They didn't go to failure. This is a quote from Steve Reeves, who's like the most famous one from that time, but they pretty much all said this. All the bodybuilders back then didn't even go to failure. If you look at how muscle growth works, it kind of can get you started on understanding how to train very time efficiently. If you know what causes muscle growth, then you don't have to spend hours because you know the specific thing you have to do. The people who have to spend hours, it's because they don't know what they need to do. So they're kind of just doing a lot, hoping that something they do is going to work. So like the average gym bro trains 10 hours a week. And the common philosophy behind this is that muscle growth is a result of the muscle like adapting to withstand the workout you put it through. It doesn't work like that at all. You can think of it more like you're activating muscle fibers that you don't normally activate. It's a very short-term thing. You don't grow because of the entire workout. You grow from what happens in a specific set that you do. So muscle fibers grow when they're activated. The reason you don't build muscle in everyday life, even though you're using your muscles, is because you're only activating a few of the muscle fibers. In order to activate more of the muscle fibers, you're going to have to push hard. So when you understand that, then you realize that you can literally train a muscle for 1 minute and it's going to grow. You can literally do 1 set, and if you achieve this high activation that is what actually causes you to build muscle, then that's all you need. Now you will grow a little more with 2 sets. This is why I'm going to recommend 1 set per workout though. So if we look at the fact that you get, the amount of muscle growth you get from the second set is going to be at most half, but it's going to be more like 40% of the muscle growth you got from the first set. And this number is going to be even lower the more advanced you are. This is a number for kind of beginners based on the research on beginners. The point of this is basically you are just much less efficient with your time once you start doing, more sets for a muscle. So like if we looked at a workout, 1 set for each muscle, it's going to be about 25 to 30 minutes. That's to get this level of growth, right? If you wanted to get this level of growth as a beginner, and then it would be lower the more advanced you are, you would, do 2 sets per workout. It's going to be an hour, probably more. So you're getting a lot less efficiency on the time that you're spending the more you decide to do. So I would recommend 1 set. You will grow for sure doing 1 set 3 times a week. And another thing to think about is, if you're going to do, let's say you have a workout where you're going to do 2 sets, it would be way better to do a set for 2 different muscles than 2 sets for like your biceps. Because once you do the second set for your biceps, you've already, stimulated it to grow. So you're going to get significant diminishing returns. But for the set for your chest, because you haven't trained your chest yet, your chest is now going to get this high level of growth. So this is kind of explains why I'd recommend like a full body workout as opposed to something like a workout where you train, your biceps and your triceps, and then the next workout you train your chest, and in each of those workouts you do like multiple sets. I'd recommend more of a full body workout, one set per muscle. Now let's look at how we're going to categorize the different things we're training. So this body part category is not how I'd recommend you categorize things. And what I mean by this is, what do we count a set? What do we count a set for? So do we count a set for your legs? Like if you do a leg extension, is that a set for your legs? The problem with that is your legs, that's a full body part. There's going to be entire muscles that you're not training at all when you train only your quads. This muscle group tier is going to be a lot better. So for example, your quads, right? There's different muscles in your quad. Your quad is a muscle group. But when you train your quads, you're basically going to train, the entire quad. Once you get to the specificity of, individual muscles, or you may have heard it called like the head of a muscle, like your tricep long head, that's really not going to be worth your time. Like the most common example is going to be, you do a squat for your quads, right? But one muscle in your quads doesn't get trained. So should you do your leg extension to train that one muscle? That's not going to be worth your time. So I'd highly recommend, categorizing things by muscle group and one set per muscle group. Now let's look at something called relevant variety. So basically you want each exercise to have a specific purpose that minimally overlaps with other exercises. So for example, let's say you did a set of bench press, right? Doing dips isn't going to be much relevant variety because, you're training basically all the same muscles. There might be slight differences, but it's not really going to be very, very relevant. Another example, let's say and instead of doing the dips, then, you'd be better off doing something that wasn't trained at all in the bench press. So like a squat or something, if you only had time to do 2 sets. Another example, if you already did a set of pull-ups, would it be more relevant variety to do a set of bicep curls or a tricep pushdown? So, your biceps already get trained in the pull-up. They won't get trained as well as in a bicep curl. But the thing is, I would recommend you do the tricep pushdown because, if you've already trained your biceps, just not as well as in a bicep curl, but you haven't trained your triceps at all, your triceps, are going to benefit way more from doing a dedicated set for them. So this is kind of what I mean by relevant variety. You want to think about, how relevant, what kind of, is the new exercise I'm doing, completely different from another exercise, or is it basically the same thing? Now, a common thing people will do when they want to have time efficient workouts is they'll do a lot of compounds. I think that doing a lot of compounds is good because you're hitting a lot of muscles at once. This isn't really how you should train, though. This isn't really what you should do. I'd highly recommend doing, an isolation for each muscle or most muscles. So the reason is I'd rather do an isolation for a muscle than have that muscle hit as a secondary muscle in 2 compound sets. So I'd rather do, a tricep pushdown for my triceps than 2 sets of bench press, because that tricep pushdown, the things you can achieve in that tricep pushdown, you can't make up for that by just doing more sets of the bench press, because there's things like you're not going to be activating all the muscles in your tricep. The muscles that you are going to be activating, you're not going to be able to achieve high levels of activation. So don't fall for this thing where people say, oh, you want to save time, do a bunch of compounds. Don't do that. For example, like if you had to pick between these 2 options and which one would be better, if you're low on time and can only do 2 exercises, would it be better to do a hack squat and a stiff leg deadlift, or a hack squat and a hamstring curl? The stiff leg deadlift is another compound, right? So you're hitting more muscles. The problem is, you've already hit some overlapping muscles with the hack squat, which was basically your glutes. So instead of hitting your glutes again and now hitting your hamstrings not quite as good, just do an isolation for your hamstrings and hit your hamstrings really well, since you've already hit your glutes. The only time that I would say that you need to do the whole compound only thing is if you are really short on time, you have like 10 minutes to train. Then you would maybe do, one set of dips, one set of chin ups, one set of a squat. However, as soon as you have time for now multiple sets of dips, you would have then been better off doing one set of an isolation for each of those muscles that are involved in the dip. So instead of doing two sets of dips, you'd be better off doing one set of a chest fly and one set of a tricep pushdown. The reason for that is the things you're missing out on. The reason that muscle gets trained less in like a dip than it would in an isolation is because you're not able to achieve as high levels of activation as you can in the isolation. So there's no way to make up for that, for muscle fibers that are just never activated in the compound. There's no way to make up for that by just doing more sets of the compound. Same with like if you had time for two sets of chin-ups, I'd rather you did one set of chin-ups and one set of a bicep curl, because your biceps are now going to get an actual high quality set for them. If you have, time for two sets of squats, but nothing else, instead of doing that, do one set of the squat, one set of a hamstring curl. Now, let's get into more specifics how you should perform a set. So I'd recommend the 4 to 7 rep range. I'd recommend 1 to 2 reps in reserve. If you don't know, reps in reserve is basically how many reps, you're leaving in the tank. If you would have gone to failure, how many reps did you get? And then how many reps before that did you stop? So if you could have gotten 10 reps with 100 pounds and you did 9 reps, that would now be 1 rep in reserve. If you did 8 reps, that would be 2 reps in reserve. Another thing, each rep, you want to perform it with maximum effort. A lot of people think that inherently when you go to failure, that's the only time you will have maximum effort. It doesn't really work like that. If you think about moving the weight as quickly as possible, even on the earlier reps, then you're now, using maximum effort on every rep, not just the very last rep. And in this rep range, the 4 to 7 rep range, even the, first rep that you try with maximum effort, it's not going to like move super quick. So yeah, each rep you want to have maximum effort. You want like a 1 to 3 second lowering phase. It doesn't really matter unless there's an injury risk. So if there's like an injury risk, like with the preacher curl at the bottom, if you have a lot of momentum going down, your elbows being pulled into hyperextension, something like that, you might want a 2 to 3 second eccentric. But yeah, it just depends on the injury risk for the exercise. Now, I'd recommend you pause in the starting position of the exercise. So not the bottom of the exercise, because a lat pull down, that's technically the starting position, is technically the top. But pause in the starting position just because it makes sure that you're not, using some kind of momentum, which is basically going to make it harder to standardize your form and therefore harder to know exactly the weight you need to get into this 4 to 7 rep range. And yeah, all these things are going to allow you to avoid doing reps when you're tired / fatigued. That's what these 4 to 7 rep range and 1 to 2 reps in reserve accomplish. Because like the last 2 reps of a set, you're actually going to have quite a bit of fatigue present. So you're not going to actually be able to achieve as high levels of activation on those last 2 reps. So, and doing those last 2 reps is also going to, you're going to have to rest disproportionately more time after doing those. So it's also minimizing the time you need to rest from your set. So you're saving a lot of time. It also is going to, allow you to gauge your proximity to failure better. So it's going to allow you to tell when you're actually at 1 or 2 reps in reserve very easily. That comes from, the low rep range makes it a lot easier. Also, using maximum effort on every rep is going to make that a lot easier as well, because the way you tell how close you are to failure, it shouldn't be how hard the rep feels, because you can that's basically like kind of subjective. You want to have something objective, and you want it to be how quick the rep moves. So if you don't have maximum effort on the first rep, the rep might move slowly, but it's not because you're near failure. If you have maximum effort on every rep, then you can basically observe a very distinct slowing down of the rep speed as you get nearer to failure, because you had the first rep move significantly quicker because you had max effort. I kind of want to show you what a set should look like A lot of people think 1 to 2 reps in reserve is like not training very hard. You are definitely going to be training hard. So that was the first rep. I have 4 reps in reserve. Notice how even that first rep was kind of slow, and I was pushing as hard as I could. See that rep? That was I still have 2 reps in reserve, but even that rep was pretty slow, right? Yeah, and I could have stopped. I'd recommend you stop at that rep or the rep before, and that's about how close to failure you should go. I did do one more rep just so you can see what it looks like, so you can kind of see the kind of rep you're gonna want to avoid, and that you will avoid when you go to 1 to 2 reps in reserve. So look at this rep. It's gonna be pay attention. Look, that rep was about 3 seconds long, and look at this rep. Super long, like a 5 second rep, right? So that's kind of what you are avoiding when you do 1 to 2 reps in reserve. Now here, you can't see my face, but I'm using maximum effort. And notice how, even the first rep, I'm at like 6 reps in reserve, but even that rep is kind of slow. So it's not like you're not training hard by doing 1 to 2 reps in reserve. So watch this. Okay, so this rep right here is going to be 2 reps in reserve. This next one, this is a rep you could end the set on, or you could do one more. See how it was pretty hard, pretty slow. And another thing to notice is, depending on the exercise, the exact time that the reps are going to be is going to be drastically different. So the exact time doesn't matter. Just pay attention to how much it slows down from the beginning. And this is that was you could argue I didn't finish a rep. It doesn't matter, but that was 1 rep in reserve, so I could have gotten one more. So this is a set I'd recommend you do. This full set, 0 reps in reserve. You don't have to do that. You can go to 1 or 2 reps in reserve, and that's actually really important to save time because you're not going to have to rest as long after that. So now let's look at kind of an overview of how I recommend you train, how to train minimalist, nonchalant. So 3 full body workouts per week. Each workout, you'll do 1 direct set per muscle. So, for your full body, it should be about 5 to 10 exercises. Um, and by the way, if you don't care about a muscle, do not train it. Don't be pressured by like the gym culture to train calves if you don't care about them, for example. I'd recommend only one taxing compound, and by a taxing compound, it's like a squat or a stiff leg deadlift. Like a chest press is a compound, but it's not like a taxing compound. So I'd recommend you do this last in the workout. It's going to save a lot of time just because the time that you're going to have to rest after this is going to be very long, like probably over 5 minutes. And the reason you'd have to rest is so the next exercise doesn't suffer from it, from the fatigue. So you're better off doing this exercise last, so you don't have to wait in the gym for yourself to recover from that. You want to use stable movements, preacher curl over a standing dumbbell curl. It's very important that you pick an exercise that you can add weight to easily and for a long period of time. So, like, if you're in your first week of training and whatever exercise you're doing, whatever weight you're using to be in that 4 to 7 rep range, if the machine or whatever you're using, if you can double, if you have room to double the weight before you like max out the machine, that's plenty of time. That's plenty of runway to add weight. You shouldn't really run into issues of not having enough weight because you got too strong or something. Let's look at an example of a workout that I'd recommend. So it'll be about 25 to 30 minutes, 1 set of each of these exercises. So notice how I have 1 set basically per muscle group. So biceps, machine preacher curl, side delts, which is what I would just call shoulders because your front and your side delt you're going to hit with other things. So a machine lateral raise, you could do, a shoulder press, whatever. Any tricep extension, machine row. If you have your elbows tucked, you're training your lats, so this can be enough for your whole back. Pec deck or anything for your chest. Leg extension, stiff leg deadlift. Notice how I have this as a taxing compound, and therefore I don't have a squat. It would have been a little bit redundant to have a squat and the stiff leg deadlift, but it also would have been two taxing compounds, which is going to be a lot less time efficient. I'd highly recommend just one, and notice how it's at the end, so I don't have to wait, until I'm recovered from that. So the fatigue from this taxing compound isn't going to affect any exercises. Also, warming up is a way that people waste a lot of time. They'll tend to, do, really lightweight for like 10 reps, thinking that they have to like move up the stack. You don't really have to do that. The main reason for warming up is to make sure there's no pain. So you're not like blindsided by some kind of pain when you start your working set. Because when you're doing a working set and you didn't even know about the pain, you're just gonna push as hard as you can. You're probably gonna get injured. So yeah, like 75 to 85% of the working weight, 2 to 4 reps, and then you can right after or wait a second do 85 to 95% for a rep or two. And you do want to use, max effort, as in moving as quick as possible, at least on this in this warm up set, just so you can get some higher forces going through, the tendons, so you can tell if there's going to be some kind of injury or some kind of pain. Another thing, if we're staying in this 4 to 7 rep range, you should be getting stronger over time. So you should be required to add weight to stay in this 4 to 7 rep range. So yeah, if you're not adding weight, I add about a rep a month to each exercise. That's about how the rate I get stronger. But yeah, if you're not getting stronger, then something's probably wrong. You might want to try maybe going to failure to make sure that you're actually training at 1 to 2 reps in reserve. But yeah, that's basically the outline of how I'd recommend you train.